Hey guys, Into the End here, back for another guide video. This is going to be a video on how to build better decks part 2B. And this is our third video. Just as a quick recap, in the first video we talked about the game plan. Everything starts with the game plan. Everything you do is simply a way to support the game plan you came up with. The second video was on card evaluation metrics, and then there are two of them. The first one is card efficiency, and this video will talk about the second one, which is card consistency. Generally speaking, consistency is the measure of how often your card is able to accomplish what you put it into your deck to do. Cards gain efficiency through one of two design mechanics. One is the inherent flexibility in the card's effects, and two, it's the card not being constrained by any conditions. And we'll start with flexibility. So I have some examples here. So I have Torch versus Purify. Both cards serve the purpose of being a removal. Both cards do exactly 3 damage, and both cards are instant speed. But Torch has additional flexibility to hit your opponent, which makes this card never a dead draw. Purify, on the other hand, can only hit units, which makes this a dead draw if your opponent have no units in play. Now, another group of very flexible cards in Eternal is Relic Weapons. They can be used as both removal cards, and they can be used as threads to hit your opponent if the board is clear. Now, compared to Purify, the Sword of Ikaria is more flexible, but compared to the Torch, it is less so because it doesn't give you the option to hit your opponent when he has a unit in play. Playing with highly flexible cards will drastically improve the consistency of your game plan simply by reducing the amount of dead draws. Generally speaking, flexible cards are also less powerful than their less flexible versions. You're making a trade-off between flexibility and raw power for the mana that you invest into it. When we make decks, we have to be very mindful of the ratio of flexible cards to niche powerful cards and to make sure that you have a right mixture. One guide that I would follow is to simply ask myself how important a particular card is to my game plan. Cards that directly support my game plan should usually be more powerful, and other enabling support cards should be more flexible. Let's take one of the game plans that we talked about in the first video as an example. If you recall, one of the slow late game control deck game plans that I had was to use efficient answers to 1-for-1 my opponent, and then when both players have exhausted their resources, use powerful spells to replenish my resources to win the late game. If we use that game plan as our example, then it dictates the kind of removal spells that I have to have in my deck. Because I specifically said in my game plan that I have to use cheap, efficient answers. And that means you have to use cards like Suffocate, Annihilate, and Vanquish. These are cheap and efficient, but they are less flexible and less powerful than Slay and Deathstrike because of the difference in power cost. Here we're putting the efficiency concept from the second video in combination with the consistency concept of this video. Sometimes a card can potentially be both more flexible and more powerful, but at the cost of higher mana. Because my game plan is to be efficient, that really limits my choices on removals. That really limits my choices on removal. That really limits my choices on my removal spells. All right. So the second part of the game plan is to replenish my resources when both my opponent and I have exhausted them, and that also dictates the kind of card draw spells that I have available to me. Small incremental gains from cards is not enough for my game plan. I need powerful draw spells. Either cards that will consistently draw me cards every turn, or cards that draws me a lot of cards when I play it. Okay. So, in conclusion, I think here we really showcase the importance of the concepts that were introduced in all three videos, because starting with your game plan, it really dictates how to evaluate cards properly and balance both the efficiency and the consistency of cards. Like I said before, everything starts with a good game plan, and everything else is simply there to support and make the game plan come true. So let's talk about the second aspect of consistency, which is conditional cards. Conditional cards require something else be done before you can achieve the desired effect of that card. From a game design perspective, I love conditional cards because they tend to create game states that are much more interesting and encourages players to plan properly and make the right decisions to make those conditions occur. I find decks that have a lot of conditional cards make for a lot more interactive and a lot more fun games as well. And I have a feeling that Direwolf Digital agrees with me on that front because, and here's my evidence, because in Omens, 3 out of the 5 faction mechanics are conditional mechanics. So nearly all weapons, combat tricks, and removal spells are conditional cards. They all need either you or your opponent to have a unit in play for them to work. And additionally, you have mechanics like Spark, Life Force, and Mentor, which are all conditional, requiring that you either have a unit, or you damage your opponent, or you gain some life. So for any of these cards to achieve full impact, you need both the enabler and the payoff. The concept here is that by combining the enabler and the payoff card, you would achieve a result that is greater than the sum of its parts. So, I think that when you build a good competitive deck, you need to avoid having too many inflexible conditional cards. Cards like removal, combat tricks, unit weapons, you need to make sure that you do not play too many copies of these, because you're going to suffer many games where you draw the wrong side of your deck and you will lose. So I have here an example of a bad deck, and this is a much inferior version of Arcano Plate. As you can see, I mean, this is not a real deck, no one's going to play with this, but you can see in this deck that there are 16 units only, which is a very low unit count, and a 17 attachments, which is an extraordinarily high amount of attachments, and 17 spells, most of which buffs your units. So most of your spells and most of your attachments only work. They are conditional cards. The condition is that there is a unit in play. Now, most of these cards, spells, and attachments are perfectly fine cards, but they are completely dead if you don't draw your units. Actually, you can also have the variance swinging the other way, where you draw only your units and you don't draw your weapons, and in which case your units are actually quite small and quite weak on their own. So, as a starting point, here's what I suggest. Here's a set of sort of general guidelines if you're building a non-control aggressive deck. Maximum of 1 weapon per 3 units, maximum of 1 unit buffing spell per 4 units, and a maximum of 15% of single-purposed, inflexible removal spells in your deck out of the 75 cards. I did this very roughly by looking at all the aggressive decks from the ETS top 8 finishes to average out a reasonable range. Please do not take these numbers as something that is set in stone. The purpose here is to simply provide you with a starting point with the expectation that you're going to go and play test thoroughly and adjust as needed. Okay. And when you evaluate cards that are conditional, such as Life Spark and Mentor or other cards like such, I suggest evaluating those cards without those abilities to see if they're worth playing. Next, ask yourself how many mediocre cards do you need to include into your deck to enable those abilities, and does the effects justify that kind of sacrifice? My key issue with conditional mechanics is that you need to draw the right number of payoff cards and enablers in the right order. Top decking your Keitra after you have used up all of your life gain is not good. Playing a Spark unit or drawing a Spark unit when you have no board presence is not good. drawing your student after playing your mentor is not good. The only way to justify playing these cards, I think, is if the mentor, the student, or the life spark card, whatever they are, if they're sufficiently powerful on their own that you don't mind playing it without that ability. So in conclusion to the video, playing with conditional, inconsistent cards opens you up to well, consistency issues. But sometimes the benefits justify the risks. But by design, if you choose to play a deck like that, you are accepting that you have a deck that is susceptible to variance. If you choose to make this kind of deck, you need to make that decision with the full knowledge that you are playing a high risk, high reward, high variance deck. And sometimes the rewards justify that kind of risk. People who play these kind of decks typically win in spectacular fashion, but they would also lose in spectacular fashion. And you shouldn't be surprised to suffer from a downward variance where you may lose 5 or 6, 7 games in a row because you drew the wrong side of your deck. So anyway, that I think concludes the video. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you like what you see, please give me a thumbs up or subscribe or share. If you have any questions for me, leave it in the comments below. If you have any good deck ideas that you want to explore with me, any questions about deck building, go ahead and leave a message. I pretty much respond to all comments. You can also add me in game. My game tag is into the end plus 2600. So once again, thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.